Hey guys, so today we're going to do section 1.4, variable expressions. Please write down the section title and also the definition of a variable. A variable is a letter or symbol used to stand for a number or a group of numbers. So, a variable that's commonly used is x. A variable expression would be something like 3 plus x or 5x squared. You can have multiple variables, x plus y. Expressions do not have equal signs, so all four of these examples here are all expressions. Expressions that end up having an equal sign turn into equations. So let's talk about properties of real numbers. Follow along, and I'm going to state the property and also give an example of what the properties are talking about. So the first one, commutative property of addition or multiplication. Commutative property means regardless of the order, the expressions will equal the same thing. So commutative property of addition, that would be something like x plus y and y plus x. Addition is commutative, so both of them mean the same thing. Same with multiplication. A, B, and B, A are both the same. Next one, associative property. A lot of people get associative property and distributive property mixed up. Associative property is where your parentheses are located, and whatever your parentheses, if you remember back in the previous section, order of operations, parentheses comes first. So associative property in this case would be A plus B plus C, whereas A plus the quantity B plus C. Your parentheses, you come first. Both of these are the exact same thing. It's just the associative property. The parentheses show you which one to do first. Same thing with multiplication. The identity element of addition. Think about what number could you add to any number in the universe and you would result in that same number as the answer. So what number could you add to 5 that your sum would result in the answer being 5? If you said 0, you are correct. So the identity element of addition would be 0. So A plus 0 will always give you back A for all real numbers that A is representing. You can plug in any real number in for A, adding 0 to it will result in it staying itself. Multiplicative property of 0, if you multiply anything by 0, what is the answer? If you said 0, you are correct. So 0 times x results in your answer being 0. The identity element of multiplication. So if you added 0 to anything and it stayed the same, what could you multiply by any number in order for it to stay the same? So the multiplicative identity. That one would be 1. So 1 times anything, 1 times A would result in A being the answer. If at any point I'm going fast, you may hit pause to catch up and write down the properties and the example next to them. All right, next one, the inverse property of addition. So if you have a value, we're going to call it A as a variable. What could you add to A for any value of A that would result in getting rid of that value? So if you have A plus something to result in it going away because it's the inverse. Oop, that 0 doesn't look too good. For this one, it's going to be negative A, the opposite. Inverse property of addition, you add it to its opposite, negative A. So if you need an example for that one, 5 plus a negative 5 would result in it being 0. Inverse property of multiplication. If you have A you're multiplying by the reciprocal, 1 over A. And that would result in your answer being equal to 1. So think of this as the first one, inverse property of addition is subtraction, so we're actually taking A and subtracting it from itself. The inverse property of multiplication is division. Another way of doing that is multiplying by the reciprocal, so 1 over A. And the last property, the distributive property. We are sharing the wealth, as I call it. So if you have, I'm going to do a value first. So if we have 3, and we're multiplying that by x plus 2y, order of operations tells us to do the parentheses first. However, x and 2y are unlike terms. They have different variable parts, so we need to share the wealth. So 3 gets multiplied to each of the coefficients. 3 times 1, 3 times 2 is 6. So that would be how to do the distributive property. In terms of using variables, if you have A times the quantity B plus C, distributive property, multiplying A to both B and C would be AB plus AC. Now let's take a look at some examples of evaluating. So you'll be given directions on what each variable's value is. So right now in part A, 2BC minus 3AD. That is an expression that can represent a lot of different things depending on what the values of A, B, C, and D are. In the directions, we are given specific values for those variables. So take a minute and write down the directions of what each of those values are, and also part A's original expression. And now we are going to evaluate that expression, which means the same thing as finding the value of that expression based on specific values of your variables. So we are going to take all 4 of these pieces of information here, A, B, C, and D, and plugging them in where we see those variables in our expression here. So we have 2. I always put parentheses around each. B is negative 2 up there. C is 3 minus 3 times A times D. Let's take a minute and check to make sure I was correct. And now we are using order of operations to simplify. Notice in between all of these parentheses here, all of those 2BC, that is multiplication. So go ahead and take a minute and do order of operations to simplify that expression. If you got negative 24, you are correct. Be careful. The first one was a negative, and the second one was negative 12. Negative 12 minus 12, they're both negative, so you add and keep the sign of the answer there. All right. Have that here. All right, so part B. Same thing. We are going to substitute in the values of the variables. I put them down here on the bottom here so that we could see them as we're doing this problem. So 3 times C times D divided by B squared. Remember in the previous class how we have to make sure we put parentheses around everything? If we didn't put a parenthesis around this negative 2, this square would have been negative 4, but since we have parentheses around it, the quantity negative 2 squared is 4. So this one here divided by 4, and multiply the rest of this out and solve for the value of this expression. If you got 9, you are correct. 3 times 3 is 9, times 4 is 36, divided by 4 is 9. All right, and this last one here, here's the directions underlined in, let's say, green. Take a minute and simplify as much as you can the expression in part C. If you got 3/4, you are correct. Order of operations, when this long division bar is here, it's understood that the whole entire numerator is a separate problem in parentheses than the denominator. I did 2 steps in one. 2 times 4 is 8, and negative 2 squared is 4 here, with the subtraction sign stays in 1 step. Just be careful. As long as they are not affecting each other, you can do 2 steps at one time. Your numerator simplifies to 3, your denominator simplifies to 4, and 3/4 stays 3/4. All right, now we are going to work on simplifying expressions here when our variables don't have values, they just stay in our expressions here. So we have to use combining like terms, distributive property, and order of operations. So write down part A. Part A, 4x minus 3 times the quantity 5x minus 6. Order of operations tells us to do parentheses first, 5x minus 6. They are not like terms. So our next step is to distribute a negative 3. Circle it because you have to remember that negative sign. So distributing negative 3. That would be negative 15x plus 18. And 4x is still there. Combining like terms. We have a 4x and a negative 15x. That would be negative 11x. And plus 18 stays. That would be the simplified form of that expression. We don't know what x is. X represents a lot of different things. So we keep x in our simplified answer. All right, part B. Go ahead and take a minute and simplify that one. Our first step is to distribute that negative 5 to the a minus 2 first. And then in the brackets, make sure that you combine like terms before distributing the 6. That way you're saving yourself some time. You'll still get the same answer. However, it just takes a little bit more time. So we can combine the negative 3 and the 10 and make that 7 minus 5a. And then distribute the 6. So go ahead and finish this one off. If you got 42 minus 30a, you are correct. If you wrote negative 30a plus 42, you are also correct. Either of those answers are fine. When we get into standard form, the constant will come last and your variable parts will come before that, but either answer in the rectangle is fine. All right, I wrote on top of my next example here. All right, take a minute and simplify part C completely. If you got 18x plus 34y, you are correct. Check my second line here. This is plus because we have a negative times a negative, and this one's also plus because negative 7. A lot of people forget about that sign when you are distributing to the second one. That's a common mistake. All right, let me know if you guys have any questions, and I will see you guys next class. Thanks.